Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the BBSRC community webinar. My name's Guy Poppy, and I'm the Deputy Executive Chair at BBSRC. And today I'm chairing the panel, and that means I'll mainly be trying to keep my panelists to time, and hopefully to be able to cover most of the questions that either we've heard before or will occur in the chat line during the meeting. The purpose of today is that we hope that you, the BBSRC community, can have an opportunity to tell us what you think. And during the webinar, there will be an opportunity to interact with us and share your views. And we welcome views from people right across the sectors that BBSRC covers in its remit, and people at different stages of their careers. As I've said, we really welcome the fact that we already had a lot of questions when people registered, and we would like you to use the question and answer function during the workshop itself to add additional questions. But obviously, how many of those we'll be able to get through in this particular session, we'll just have to see. You can, as I said, provide comments in the chat line. Just a few words of housekeeping before we move to Melanie's presentation, is that we welcome viewpoints, as I said, from people right across the community. So the full breadth of BBSRC's remit, and we really kind of please urge everybody to kind of ask questions or to think about it within that context. We are recording the webinar, and this will be made available on the UKI website after the event. And to support accessibility, we'll be using the closed captioning section, and you are able to access and see that or hide it using the CC button on your screen. And then finally, we will be, as I said, recording this webinar, but you will be muted during the panel, and we can't see your video. And for me as the chair, that's very, very useful, because trying to see 800 pictures on a screen and that would be extremely difficult. So as I said, you'll only be able to see the speakers and the panelists today. So we will be joined by members of the senior executive team of BBSRC. Their photos are on the screen now, but it gives me great pleasure to start today's webinar by handing over to Melanie, the Executive Chair, who's going to talk us through BBSRC's new strategic delivery plan. Melanie.
Thank you, Guy, and hopefully you can hear me, and hopefully I have control of the slides, which I do, and that seems to be working. So welcome, everyone. Just echoing Guy's thanks for joining us this morning in what we hope will be an interactive session and give you an opportunity to ask us questions and for us to reflect a little bit about some of the activities that we've been very involved in over the last year. And it is a year since we had our inaugural webinar, community webinar, and we found that to be really helpful and successful, and so we wanted to repeat that this year. So here we are, and thank you all for joining. So I'm going to sort of give us the high level strategic overview of BBSRC, and I'm sure that many of you are already very familiar with what we do, but recognizing that we have a broad audience joining us today, I kind of thought it was important to just sort of set that out, so we're all starting from the same point on the same page. So what we do, we have a broad, oops, now I'm changing slides when I'm not meaning to, apologies. We have a broad audience, we have a broad remit, which go all the way through from single molecule studies right through to studying populations. So the images at the top of the slide. And really kind of some of the key features of what we do is that we want to support discovery and strategic bioscience right across that broad remit, really pushing the frontiers of understanding and knowledge, and using that to really think about how we can create a better future for all of us in many different ways. And bioscience, I think, and you'll get that from the presentation, I think has a really key role to play in tackling some of those big challenges that we face, not just nationally, but internationally. People are at the heart of our research and innovation system, and so supporting training of the next generation of researchers, but actually thinking about how we support skills development much more broadly across the biosciences is something which is important to us. We recognise that infrastructure is key for enabling people to carry out their cutting edge research, and that comes in many different forms, both in terms of physical facilities, but also distributed data infrastructures, for example. And we invest on behalf of the taxpayer in research and innovation across the biosciences. And so we have a responsibility to work with you, members of the community, to ensure that we're actually supporting and encouraging the translation of the knowledge that you are generating to its broadest possible impact, whether that's societal or whether that's economic. And given the nature of bioscience, many of the topics that we are exploring will have interest that go beyond the research laboratory and into the wider public. And so supporting public dialogue and public engagement, again, is really important to us. A particular feature that I just want to mention around the bioscience portfolio is that we support 8 strategically funded institutes with long-term funding, and their strategic programs really focus on some of those big societal challenges. And in these 8 institutes, we have built national capability and expertise. And many of those institutes are at the core of research innovation campuses, which we've supported the development of. So bringing business, particularly startups, into close proximity with discovery research. And we published an institute strategy last year, which sets out our expectations for those institutes around capability, connectivity, and culture. So that's sort of essentially what we do. 2022 has been quite a significant year for UKRI and for the councils which comprise UKRI. UKRI we published our first 5-year strategy in March this year, Transforming Tomorrow Together, which set out 6 strategic objectives, which you can see here on the slide. And these objectives are all underpinned by 4 principles for change, which sort of really set out how we want to work to deliver against these strategic objectives. And those are diversity, connectivity, resilience, and engagement. And I think it's important just to say at this point that I think we recognise that since the creation of UKRI 4.5 years ago, we've been on a journey together. But I just want to be really clear that UKRI is one organisation. We work together across the councils, and the councils really comprise the organisation. UKRI isn't something else. We are all part of that organisation. And I think it's important that we're really clear about that. And some of the evidence will come through in my next few slides. So the first piece of evidence about how we actually work together collectively across UKRI, I think is demonstrated by the funding allocations that were confirmed in May this year. So over the next 3 years, so this is our first multi-year spending review settlement. The total budget across UKRI is 2.5 billion, which is a big investment, and that's actually an increase over that 3-year period of 14%. I don't believe that if we had still been individual research councils working together, we would have achieved that level of increase in our budgets. We've achieved that because we've worked collectively across UKRI. We've built a really strong evidence base to our government department bays and to Treasury to convince them that actually investing in research is really important for the country's future. And I think that is true more so now than even it was last year when we were making the case. The thing that we are doing differently, and I will touch on, is that, and I know there have been questions in the community around this, is around how we brought together the funding across councils into a collective talent fund. And people want to understand more about what this means. So all of our training budgets we've brought together collectively, and that's around 2 billion across UKRI councils. And we are working together to make sure that the programmes that we have are more harmonised, more simplified, and making it easier for you to apply and to manage those programmes, and for us to actually award them and to administer them, and looking to the future to actually be able to support more more cross-disciplinary training opportunities, but looking across the breadth of what we do and really learning from each other. This builds on a strong foundation, a strong platform of working together in the collective talent area. So I'm happy to say more about that, might come up in questions. So moving on, BBSRC in September this year, so I said it had been a significant year, published our refreshed strategic delivery plan, which covers the 3-year period of the spending review settlement, and where we set out a vision for advancing the frontiers of biology to drive towards that healthy, prosperous and sustainable future. And our strategic delivery plan very much maps onto and aligns with that overarching UKRI strategy. So our strategic delivery plan is framed around the 6 strategic objectives that are in the UKRI strategy, around people and careers, where we have a particular focus on talent and the broader environment, the research and innovation culture within which those people work, around places, so how we invest in infrastructure, our institutes and campuses and our international partnerships. Ideas, bioscience discovery is really important, understanding the rules of life, which is a feature of our previous delivery plan. We've continued our support there. Innovation, how we support innovation and how we can build strong partnerships across the ecosystem, supporting translation, enterprise and venture. And our impacts, and I'll say a little bit more about those, around transformative technologies, which we've had a rich legacy of supporting in BBSRC, and some of those big, broad societal challenges, sustainable agriculture and food, advanced manufacturing, clean growth, and integrated understanding of health. And of course, the 6th objective around UKRI as an organisation, taking forward some of the recommendations from the grant and the TCAL reviews around how we work and how we engage with you. And I think connectivity and collaboration, so 2 of the key elements that we discussed at our annual strategic workshop at the end of September, kind of come into many of these different priority areas. And obviously that connectivity is one of the key underpinning principles of how we want to deliver the UKRI strategy. So just to go on and say a little bit more about what we're looking to achieve through those objectives in our delivery plan. And our delivery plan both sets out that long-term horizon about the direction of travel and what outcomes we're looking for, but also sort of sets out what very specifically we're doing in terms of near-term actions, whether those are funding programs or whether those are strategic development or review approaches. So in people and careers, we sort of have 4 key areas that we're actually looking at. And some of the outcomes that we're looking for is really how can we attract, retain and develop highly skilled, diverse, because we know diversity is really important for productivity, and currently we need a boost to productivity and growth to support the UK economy. So this is really important. And recognising that our workforce are going to probably be different in the future, and how do we actually support mobility and porosity across that workforce? We've had some programmes and we'll hear a little bit later about those, and we have a particular topic on that. But in terms of diversity, I'm really pleased that yesterday UKRI were able to publish our latest data set on diversity around our applicants and awardees. And this is informing work that we're actually doing now and that we will do more of in the future, because we understand the characteristics of our population, who we're funding and who, equally important, who isn't as successful at our funding. In terms of places, strengthening our capabilities are important, ensuring that we've actually got access to the resources and the infrastructures that we're investing in so that everyone can benefit. And I think this is where the connectivity is important, particularly with the strategic institutes that we fund. In terms of ideas, obviously the outcome that we're really looking for here is the UK has enjoyed and continues to enjoy a really leading position in bioscience research, and that's recognised globally. And we want to ensure that we can play our part in maintaining that position. So maintaining our flagship responsive mode programme, our longer, larger grants, and also some more sort of breakthrough awards that are looking at early stage discoveries, that may not have the data associated with them, but are some really interesting ideas, and looking at how we can support those. And in terms of innovation, obviously, as I've mentioned, incentivising and supporting bioscience innovation is really important to us. There's many different modes of actually doing that, but obviously working collaboratively and in partnership with business is really important, and also working very strongly, as we have done in the past and as we've committed to in the future, with Innovate UK, because it's really important that we're joining up across those elements. In terms of our strategic themes, and these used to be obviously 3 key strategic themes that were very prominent in our previous strategic delivery plan and our forward look, now sort of captured under one objective, but no less important because of that, and also joined by transformative technologies. Transformative technologies, as I said, are really important for BBSRC, and I think we have a rich legacy of supporting emerging technologies, whether that's in genomics, whether that's in systems biology, and more recently in synthetic biology, but looking actually how those technologies can enable you, the research community, to push the frontiers of knowledge. And engineering biology is one of those areas which builds on the capabilities that we've supported along with other councils across UKRI to develop a really vibrant community in the UK, and wanting to do more to support that. And we are leading, but very much on behalf of UKRI in that space. The 3 other areas here, sustainable food and agriculture, I think, hardly a week goes by that we don't hear about the increasing impacts and cost of food as a consequence of a number of shocks to the system, starting with the pandemic, but clearly also conflict in Ukraine, climate change. We really need to think about how we transform our food systems so that they deliver benefits for our health, but also take into account the broader environmental impacts that food production has, and how we can move towards greater sustainability. Really important. Advancing manufacturing and clean growth. Again, I don't think we can imagine a future where we are reducing our reliance on fossil fuels that doesn't involve bioscience-based solutions, or bio-based solutions, if you will. And we've got some great examples coming through from previous investments in this area. And an integrated understanding of health, how we can improve human and animal health and well-being across that life course, is so important. We've had the pandemic, but we're working ever more collaboratively with key partners in this space, particularly MRC and with the Department of Health and Social Care and the UK Health Security Agency. We've had recent investments in the threats of avian flu, which are becoming really significant, and also the monkeypox outbreak as well. Very much that we are actually doing now and will continue to do. And I always like to illustrate in these presentations some of the outcomes from research that we've been supporting more recently. So I've got 3 examples here that sort of map to those broad impact areas. So the first one is work from the University of Nottingham, where they have been using sophisticated imaging techniques to look at root development, and they've discovered a novel water sensing mechanism. So in low moisture in the soil, they have found that there's a redistribution in water flux, a redistribution in abscisic acid. And when this occurs in low water conditions, it results in the closure of root tip cell channels, and this results in a decrease in the uptake of auxin, which is responsible for that branching of the roots. So in low water conditions, we now understand, this suggests, the mechanism that actually inhibits that root branching and growth. And obviously it's reversible when external conditions change, so that moisture is then available. But this is quite fundamental understanding of the rules of life, if you like, that clearly can have applications if we're thinking about how we might translate that knowledge to develop climate resilient crops, for example, which with the change in climate, we understand is going to be a real challenge. The second example is work from the University of Manchester, using a process, developing a platform for directed and rapid evolution of enzymes, which could have real application in industrial biotechnology processes. They focus particularly on engineering enzymes which degrade polyethylene terephthalate. And through their platform that they developed, have been able to engineer a thermostable PETase, which can degrade polyethylene terephthalate-based single-use plastics. And this could potentially, both this enzyme, but this platform could provide potential valuable tools when you're looking to actually scale up and use those enzymes in industrial processes. So I think really interesting developments there. And the third example is from two of our research institutes, the Welham Institute and the Quadram Institute, where they have been tracking antimicrobial resistance and emergence in real time. So they've done that using single-cell genomics to track bacterial populations and the diversity within those populations. And they've been able to highlight that in low antibiotic conditions, you see in real time emergence of resistance and diversification of that population. So I think this approach is a potentially powerful new way of actually improving understanding of that evolution of microbial systems, and might give us new clues about how we can tackle antimicrobial resistance. So I talked to this point a lot about our specific bioscience ambitions over the spending review period set out in our SDP. But I also, at the start of my presentation, talked very much about how we're working as one UKRI organisation. And this is exemplified not just in the good outcome that we have from the spending review, but the way that we're working together across a range of interdisciplinary strategic programmes that I've highlighted here: building a green future, better health, ageing and well-being, tackling infections, and transformative technologies. I've already mentioned the transformative technologies, so I won't dwell on those again. But in terms of the other three areas, these are areas where bioscience has a really critical role to play and a really critical role to advance understanding and offer bio-based solutions. But we know that bioscience, whilst our view might be that it's at the core of some of these things, actually requires other disciplines to come in and work together. So working sort of in those cross-cutting themes, working to convene and catalyze and develop these joint programs that really tackle some of these big challenges, I think is one of the most exciting things that we're actually doing. There's a lot of activity here. Recognize that we haven't shared so much of this. These themes are within the UKRI strategy, but we will be communicating more about these early in the new year, and also looking to start to launch some initial programs in these areas. So I flag that now because these do cut across a whole breadth of our remit, and so flagging them for you to look out for. But I think the barriers to working in this cross-disciplinary way are very, very much reduced now that we are 4.5 years into UKRI, and I think this is really one of the major benefits of the creation of UKRI as one organisation. And I think that is the end of my slides. So I will thank you for your attention. Thank you for attending the webinar again, and hand back to Guy. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie, and we're very much on time, which is always a good thing when we've got such a diverse and interesting a series of talks. So the next part of the webinar, we want to address a couple of themes that have emerged from a range of discussions amongst the community and stakeholders as being of particular interest. And we want to choose these films because we think they highlight the importance of connectivity across the research and innovation landscape. And that's important in delivering the plan that Melanie's just described to you. And we think that BBSRC plays a big role as a connector and a convener to enable this to happen. And again, please put your thoughts in the question and answer function or chat. And later in the session, we'll actually be using a Mentimeter to go and gather some feedback. But to start, I'd like to introduce Amanda Collis, who's the Executive Director for Research Strategy and Programs. And she's going to provide an update on BBSRC's support for international partnering, which I'm sure you will agree is an extremely important area for BBSRC and science in general in the UK. Over to you, Amanda.
Okay, so thanks very much, Guy, and good morning to our 520 participants. As Guy has said already, I just want to share some of the kind of strategic kind of positioning around our international partnership and pick up on that kind of connecting and convening role that BBSRC plays, as well as, of course, share where we are around kind of Horizon Europe alternatives, as we felt that based on the pre-webinar input that this was a topic that that would be of interest to you. So we have a couple of questions, and we just want to give a kind of heads up to those questions before I set out a little bit more detail around BBSRC's international activities and also around Horizon Europe and alternatives. Because we'd really value your comments in the chat, your reactions and reflections on those questions. So the first question is really around, in this current period of uncertainty in international funding, what is the right balance, in your mind between top-down and bottom-up approaches? Top-down being that, perhaps a focus on specific topics and on specific countries, bottom-up being kind of open to any country, any theme. So I'd really love to hear from you on that. And also a second question, which is around, the opportunities and challenges for bioscience research and innovation if the UK doesn't associate to Horizon Europe. But you're really looking to hear from our webinar participants and what you see is both the opportunities and also the challenges. So really looking forward to seeing kind of comments kind of coming through the chat over the next few moments or few minutes. Okay, so moving on, just wanted to set out a little bit of the wider context around our international partnerships in bioscience and biotechnology. And this is partly because there's much more almost kind of like policy and kind of that kind of wraps around our international programs compared to, say, our responsive mode program. That policy and that influence, it may well come from new ministers in the UK government, or indeed the changing interests of funding partners kind of overseas. It comes through, for example, the integrated review, which was published in 2021, led by the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. It also picks up on the kind of general uncertainty in economic outlook, and Melanie's already covered a couple of points in terms of some of the uncertainty that we experience and manage as a part, and the role that bioscience and biotechnology can play in tackling some of those issues. And then there's also the piece around working as one UKRI, a point that Melanie's also made, and particularly in terms of our international programmes. Not only do we have our one UKRI strategy, but we also have an international strategic framework, and that really presents a holistic view of UKRI's international offering, and which BBSRC, along with other discipline councils, was very active in shaping. Okay. And just to bring that to bear on our strategic delivery plan that Melanie's already introduced you to, and recognising in that strategic delivery plan the importance of international collaboration within that kind of section on place, and recognising the benefits that international collaboration brings to the UK's research endeavour. For example, through the leveraging, not just of kind of resource or financial resource, but very much that levering of knowledge, that making a whole greater than the sum of the parts in terms of tackling global challenges, for instance, and also the importance of mobility and talent. In terms of absolutely taking combined approaches to global challenges, and then working to undertake kind of horizon scanning, but taking an international outlook as distinct from just looking at the national agenda. And also international partnership means not only are we able to benefit and also share kind of skills and data infrastructure approaches, we're able to work across a number of different areas of research and indeed infrastructure and technologies with a range of countries around the globe. And just to, I think I've skipped, I'm having, right, okay, yeah, I'm being a little bit clunky. I do apologise with moving between the slides and getting my keyboard to respond in a timely fashion. So moving on from our strategic delivery plan, I just wanted to give webinar participants a flavour of the global reach activities that we have within BBSRC. And on the level, this slide, you could view it as something of alphabet soup, but on another level, this does absolutely cover a great range of different types of partnerships and different types of approaches. So, for example, we do undertake and have had a significant portfolio of programs around global challenges. Yes, that indeed embraced kind of Newton and GCRF in its time, but also around work around the International Wheat Yield Partnership and the Wheat Initiative. We're very active as well in terms of the international research laboratories and infrastructures. For example, EMBL, the European Molecular Biology Laboratory, noting the outstation here in Hingston in the UK. Also in terms of absolutely kind of that research-led international collaboration, you know, whether that's through our international schemes or whether that is indeed through EMBO, for example, or from the Human Frontier Science Programme. And importantly, as a part of that connector and convening role as well, we also work closely with UK government and around advancing kind of multilateral ambitions. That can be through, for example, our participation in the OECD's Global Science Forum, or indeed Science Europe, equally also the G20. So a whole range of activities where BBSRC and within UKRI and with UKRI colleagues working through to say our government departments of interest to drive forward those ambitions. In terms of fostering strategic partnerships, we have a number of country bilaterals. We have a number of lead agency collaborations that are active at the moment, and in particular with the National Science Foundation in the US. And we are also very active around European kind of transnational programs, whether that's through the joint programming initiatives, for example, those around animal health or soil science, diet and health, whether that's through what we're IRINET kind of co-funds again around animal health, and just to recognise that piece around Europe also, which I'll come on to a little bit later on. So I'm going to move to the next slide now, and hopefully this is going to work. And this is just a slide to briefly show you, as we look back over the last 10 years of our portfolio, what that looks like in terms of our international partnerships. And I think what you can see from the heat map and also the bar chart is where we have worked in bottom-up kind of collaborative approaches, particularly with the United States, and through kind of that alignment of responsive mode activity, how that has had a significant impact upon our investments and upon our kind of portfolio of international collaboration. But also recognizing there the importance of working with China and India and Brazil, supported largely through ODA funding. And then also with European countries, and this will be through co-funds and European joint programming, for example, particularly kind of Germany there, and also Ireland and France. But I wanted to move on now to say a few words about Horizon Europe. And again, there just seems to be a lack of responsiveness. There we are with the slides. And to the next slide. In terms of Horizon Europe, it remains the government's priority to associate to Horizon Europe. However, everybody on the webinar will be aware, of course, that there have been delays here. And what does that mean? That means that UKRI is working with the UK government to prepare for all possible outcomes and getting ready to deliver a set of transitional measures and long-term programmes, as well as working through and supporting the Horizon Europe guarantee funding. And in terms of Horizon Europe alternatives, I just wanted to flag firstly that UKRI is the main delivery partner for Horizon Europe alternatives package, and that BBSRC, alongside all other parts of UKRI, is preparing for and engaging with all of the opportunities and challenges that are brought by Horizon Europe alternatives if implemented. And I particularly wanted to draw your attention to a document that was published by the UK government back in the summer now, which was really around setting out support for UK R&D and collaborative research beyond Horizon programmes. And that publication not only outlined transitional measures that would provide in the very immediate term, if we did not associate, would provide stability and continuity, but also that document sets out a longer term vision and 4 pillars of a future programme focused on talent, focused on what's termed end-to-end innovation, focused on global collaboration and partnership, and focused on boosting investment in infrastructure and institutions. And one slide in all of the Horizon Europe work and Horizon Europe alternatives work that I always find kind of very helpful in a way is this one, which really does set out an overview of the transitional measures, and within that, essentially a way of tracking through from a call or applicant's particular situation and application stage through to what would happen or what would be the approach forward. And in this, I just really wanted to pull out, for example, that if you were, for example, as an individual who was considering an ERC application that you were about to apply, then you would look to move through the uplifted talent and innovation schemes. Equally, if you were a partner in a collaborative application, applied for EC funding or been successful, then you would pull through into that Horizon guarantee. And I did just want to flag the Horizon guarantee, just to say a few words there. It is very much alive and well, very active. It's been really ramping up in terms of the applications that have been considered, the grant offer letters issued. And I think the value of grants offered in just over about £500 million at the end of October. So that's the kind of the transitional measures piece. But I just did want to finish by flagging a more recent development, or very recent development actually, that was made just on the 21st of November. And this was a set of announcements which aim to support research and innovation during this ongoing kind of delay, and through which UKRI will invest 280 million in new funding. And this compromises investment in research and innovation infrastructure, in talent research, and also that stabilisation piece I've mentioned earlier, and also in terms of QR and investment in QR, directed towards kind of the international activities where QR plays a role. And that was part of a bigger announcement by government overall, And of course, it already does build upon what UKRI is delivering through the Horizon Europe guarantee. So I just wanted to finish by bringing you back to those two questions that we started with, around striking the right balance between top down and bottom up, and then also the opportunities and challenges if UK does not associate to Horizon Europe. I look forward to scrolling through the chat and also to answering any questions later, and back to Guy. Thank you.
Many thanks, Amanda, and thank you everybody for your extensive use of the chat channel, which is very, very welcome. And I'm sure you'll appreciate this is a complicated situation at the moment, but colleagues in UKRI are working extremely hard, as Amanda was outlining, and the information you provide is extremely useful in terms of working forward on some of these things. So the next and in fact the final presentation before we have a panel is from Aidan Grimsley, who's the Senior Portfolio Manager within BBSRC for Capability and Innovation. And I'm sure many people on the call be very interested in understanding the work in terms of the talent mobility aspect of BBSRC's work. So over to you, Aidan.
Thank you very much, Guy, and good morning, everyone. So as with the prior session, we'll be looking for your feedback at the end of this session, and we'll be doing that by running a Mentimeter, asking the questions which are on screen now, which are broadly around roles, sectors, and skills gaps. So please feel free to bear these in mind as I move through the session. So by way of introduction, I just want to touch on why supporting talent mobility is important. We've heard about the benefits of diversity, and we do believe that great research and innovation is delivered by diverse teams. And that includes students, postdocs, investigators, technicians, knowledge exchange staff, and many more. And one particular aspect of diversity is a breadth of experience. So we feel that we should therefore support individuals to experience new environments and encourage their exposure to the huge variety of possible career pathways within research, and indeed celebrate and recognise that career pathway diversity. This also has the benefit of increasing porosity between sectors like academia, industry, and policy, which helps deliver impact from research. So with that in mind, what I'm going to talk about in this session are some of our key programs and our awards which support mobility across a breadth of roles. And along the way, I intend to present some case studies to provide a bit of flavour. So the first scheme I'm going to discuss are our professional internships for PhD students, or our PIPs. These are 3-month placements embedded into our doctoral training partnerships, and they give students an opportunity to gain professional experience in something very different from their doctoral research. And the opportunities available to students in these PIPs are really broad, which is what I'm trying to demonstrate on this slide. And this is by no means an exhaustive list. And many students do choose to pursue research in a different environment, often moving into an industrial setting. Others will choose to explore other sectors related to research, including scientific publishing, science communications and outreach, patent law, policy, consulting. Others still might choose to do something much further afield from the research sector. So some examples I've included here are of placements within finance and marketing. And it's also worth noting that students can pursue international placements for their PIPs. To demonstrate the impact PIPs have had, I've picked out some quotes from PIP students who were asked how they benefited from their placement. So many students comment on the value of PIPs in broadening their horizons, which is great to see, and in developing those transferable skills. But further key themes arise from these quotes, including the value of PIPs as a networking opportunity, the real confidence boost actually that they provide students, and particularly just how much the hosts themselves value having the students there. Which brings me to the point that the value and impact of PIPs really extends beyond the value to the individual student on placement. So to demonstrate this, I've picked out a PIPs case study of 2 students from the John Innes Centre who delivered training on a method for diagnosing wheat rust. This training was provided to participants in Ethiopia. It was originally intended to be done in person, but due to lockdowns, the students had to work to convert it into a format suitable for remote delivery. They were able to successfully deliver the training, and I think it's great to consider the sort of impact this could have on Ethiopian food security. Of course, the DTPs are not the only student option, so I'd also like to highlight the opportunities for non-DTP students, particularly those on our CTP and case studentships. So our case studentships are led by research organisations with an industrial collaborator, and our CTPs are very much led by the business with a focus on an industrial research challenge. So these are a great way for students to experience both an industrial and an academic research environment, and again, encourage the porosity between those sectors. So at this stage, I've talked a lot about students. But as I touched on at the beginning, mobility opportunities are important for all research careers and career stages. So one way that we can support people in other roles is through our flexible talent mobility accounts, or our FTMAs. So these can support a broad range of research staff, including postdocs, technicians, PIs and co-Is, knowledge exchange and commercialization professionals, even professional services staff. So these awards enable research organisations to send these individuals on exchanges, secondments or placements, again, to really work outside of their usual environment. Often this means moving into a different sector, from academia into industry or policy, most commonly, or into a very different research discipline. And much like the PIPs, these activities are intended to act as a platform for training and skills development of the individuals undertaking the activities, and also enable the forging of new collaborations or strengthening existing collaborations. As you might guess from their title, these awards are very flexible in the way that they can be used. And we found that this level of flexibility can really help individuals leverage the benefit of the awards. So as an example, some individuals choose to undertake a full-time placement, others find that a part-time placement enables them to better balance their existing responsibilities. Similarly, I've seen placements in duration of months and other placements in duration of days. I've seen some day release models be particularly effective for some technicians. The awards can enable national and international mobility, and even internal secondments, for example, movement of researchers into their local tech transfer offices. And there's no real restriction on collaborator, provided that the mobility opportunity is sufficiently intersectoral or interdisciplinary and addresses a specifically identified training and development need for the individual. So to give you a better flavour of these awards, I've pulled out a few examples to share with you. We've always been keen to ensure that technicians can benefit from these awards, so my first set of example focuses on them. And the first is a collaboration between staff from the Welham Institute who worked with a local film studio to develop training videos on their equipment. So this gave staff a very different experience from their day-to-day, and the Institute gained some lasting impact from the activity, since the videos are still used and reduced the need for on-site equipment training. In my second example, we're looking at an exchange of animal technicians between Babram and Charles River Labs. And I've included this one because I love the quote that one of the technicians gave, saying that the opportunity enhanced their professional visibility and improved their awareness of different career opportunities, which really resonates well with some of the objectives of these awards. One thing I hadn't yet touched on is that these FTMAs can also be used for direct training, provided that training is in support of mobility opportunities. So to provide an example of what I mean by that, technicians were able to attend a workshop to equip them with the skills and tools that they might use to identify potential industrial collaboration opportunities within their skill sets, and then use what they'd learned to go out and identify collaborations for future FTMA rounds. And my understanding is that this training has also led to the university exploring other routes to support technicians to engage with industry. It's also quite common to run activities such as conferences to enable perhaps an FTMA cohort participants to share their learnings with one another. My second set of examples then focuses on postdocs. And in the first, a university industry collaboration actually spurred the pursuit of IP. And this also provides a great example of how these awards can lay the foundation for ongoing collaboration, given that these organizations are now jointly supervising 2 PhD students. Then in my final example, a postdoc was able to engage with small-scale collaborators that might not normally be considering research collaboration. So in this example, a postdoc worked with independent artisanal cheesemakers to understand more about how their specific techniques and their microbial diversity affect the qualities and the flavors of their cheese. So this postdoc gained access to some really unique microbial cultures, some dating back to the 1930s, and in return, the cheesemakers gained a much deeper understanding of what makes their particular processes unique to them. So I think this is a really interesting example of how smaller companies can also benefit from the FTMA scheme. Moving away from FTMAs, this is my final slide, which is a case study demonstrating how various BBSRC and Innovate UK funding can support enterprising academics on their journey to establishing their own business. So Joe Healy took this first step as a PhD student by attending an iCure pre-accelerator. Through a variety of further funding, including a Pathfinder Award and follow-on funding, he was able to develop his business plan, conduct market research, further develop his technology, file for a patent, and ultimately secure venture capital investment. So I hope that I've demonstrated some ways in which our programs can support a breadth of opportunities and how these opportunities are available to a wide variety of research roles. Hopefully you've enjoyed some of the specific case studies I've picked out. We're now going to move on to that interactive part of our session, which we'll use Mentimeter. So I'll be passing back to Guy to take us through that process, but thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Aidan. I'm slightly nervous you asking me to take us through a Mentimeter process, but you see in front of you the website, and it'll be put into the chat function too. And what we're asking for you to do now is to log on to that, but we will keep this open for some time after this webinar. So if you aren't able to do it live, the next few days you have the opportunity to do it too. And as I said, it's still in the chat function. And what we would like you to do is to log on to that, and we're roughly 3 minutes per question. And what you need to be conscious of when you've answered the first kind of question on your screens, you need to go to the slide at the top of the screen when it says the presenter has changed slides to be able to scroll through to the next slide. But what we have here is the first question, which is which role should BBSRC be providing greater mobility support for? And you can see a live view here. So I'm very quickly able to work out, although there's 481 of you on the call, we only have about 100 people who've managed to get through the Mentimeter at this stage. So it'd be nice to see a few more coming through here, but what you can see is obviously there's a large number of people who kind of are suggesting that the postdocs are the areas that we need to be providing greater mobility for, and PhDs are strong there too, and investigators. In terms, and the knowledge exchange and technicians not scoring quite so highly at this moment, but as I said, this is going to be open for some time after, and it would be useful to get feedback. As Aidan was saying, I think what's really interesting is the fact that actually people's journeys now can be very, very diverse, in which one can have significant impact in a range of bioscience sectors, whether that be in academia itself, in industry, in government, or in the third sector, and the opportunities to have that mobility is really increasing. So that we're getting much more like the numbers now. So it seems really good that several hundred of you have now replied, which is getting closer to the number of participants on the call. But what's coming through clearly here is obviously postdocs being the area where people think there should be greater mobility. What we don't know is whether the majority of participants are postdocs and therefore voting for themselves. I mean, that'd be interesting, but maybe I'm getting too intense on the data in this live kind of emerging numbers. But thanks very much for that one. I think we possibly can move through 226. I've worked out where that showed now. So roughly half the people on the call answered that one. So this one is, which sectors would you gain benefit from as a career mobility opportunity? And for those who haven't managed, you need to scroll through to the next slide on your sites. So this is interesting. We're approaching 100 people going through it, and a kind of an interesting aspect in terms of mobility into industry, which is a really thing. And some of the examples that Aidan showed, I think, showed kind of some really exciting journeys in that space. Having done a secondment myself into policy, it's sad to see less people wanting to go into policy, but you can see there's still 71 people at this stage have kind of said that. And we've got, so academia and industry are kind of the areas where people think that the mobility would perhaps offer the best opportunity. Public engagement and charity not scoring so high on this. Maybe that's people, because it's happened less in the past, people perhaps don't see the opportunities of potentially going into those sectors. But again, we've had 219 out of the 458 people that are currently on the call, and it'll be interesting, as I say, over the next couple of days, people that haven't managed to do it live, if they are able to click through and contribute to this one. And maybe we'll go through to the last question. What are the current gaps in provision of training and development for you and or your team? This one, I think, is a word cloud, so this is going to be quite different to commentate on live, but I hope I'm right in that. But let's see what sort of starts to emerge in this space. We've got one participant. Okay. Now, as I was saying earlier, all of this information will be taken in and is invaluable for us. In terms of your chat and questions and answers, we will do the best to respond to some kind of live, but that will be very difficult considering the volume of what's coming in. We're obviously going to have the panel session after this, which will enable us to do that. And one of the things that we hope to be able to do is kind of determine some sort of cluster themes stroke questions, such that we will develop perhaps some answers to those which we can distribute to people after the event, as against responding to every single question, because some of the questions are quite similar in terms of the areas that they're kind of covering. So we've got 120. Well, we're getting more people coming into this word cloud, and the provision and training development. You know, obviously the funding is kind of coming out loud and clear there. And I read in the chat and line 2 some comments about, you know, some of these schemes are really great in terms of what they can offer, but for instance, PIPs, but sometimes the funding is a bit of a limiting factor in what one might get out of that. It's interesting to see bioinformatics in such a prominent aspect there in terms of training and development, which again is probably no surprise, but it's interesting to have it reinforced by the 193 people that have submitted to this word cloud. Project management and other areas, statistics. So again, it's very useful. Please contribute to this after. And I think now, just almost exactly on time, we'll move to the panel session, which I think will be hopefully a very stimulating session for you. And as I said, if you want to contribute to any of these 3 questions, then you can still do that over the next couple of days, and we will come back and have a look at those. So thank you very much. Okay, so we're now in a live panel and question and answer session, and please use question and answer feature, but as I said, it might be quite difficult to go through the volume of questions that we have here. We had a lot of questions when people registered, and some of those questions we've kind of created some themes around, which we will certainly start off by looking at. and I'm joined today by members of the senior exec team at BBSRC, Melanie, who you've already heard from, and Amanda, who you've already heard from, and Sarah, who I'm sure will introduce herself when she first speaks, and Karen, who respectively look after the more sort of strategic relationships, and then some of the sort of more innovative, kind of where BBSRC science kind of links into sort of innovation. And the member of the senior executive team who isn't joining us is Bill Pole, who's the chief operating officer, but that then gives you a picture of all the members of the senior exec team. So without further ado, we'll start this session, and the first question is to Melanie, and it is, which parts of this delivery plan are you most excited about?
So I was interested in this question because it's almost like asking you, do you have a favourite child? Which of course the answer is no. But I would say that the piece that I think is really core to our delivery plan is around the support we give for people and the wider environment that those people are within, because I think people are at the heart of the research and innovation system. We can't do anything if it's not for the people who are here on this webinar. So I think people, I would say, and I think the things that we can do to support people and really shift how we're actually supporting people and creating that supportive environment as well. I think that's what I'm most excited by.
Okay, and then to Sarah, the question is how can stakeholders, of which I note a number have joined us today, including the government? I don't know why it was including the government. They're obviously a stakeholder, but engage with BBSRC to help deliver some of the impacts that are in this strategic development delivery plan.
Thanks, guys. So for those who don't know me, I'm Sarah Perkins. I'm Exec Director of Strategic Planning, Evidence and Engagement, and really continuing Melanie's theme around people there with stakeholder engagement. It's one of the key principles of the UKRI strategy, and really helps to ensure that we have a successful research and innovation system. And we do that through a variety of ways: webinars such as this, our consultations, workshops, our relationships with our strategic partner universities. But I just wanted to flag actually that earlier this year we commissioned a survey around stakeholder engagement to understand how well we do this, and indeed opportunities where we might be able to strengthen our engagement with our stakeholders. So just to let you know that our council will be reflecting on the synthesised report and our subsequent strategy later this month, and so please do look out for it in the new year.
Thank you, Sarah. And one for Amanda here, which is, how is the UK approach to multidisciplinary research going to future in the new BBSRC strategic development plan, and how do you anticipate working with other councils to fund interdisciplinary research? And I might offer a slight follow-up because there's been some questions about that in the chat line too.
Okay, thanks very much, Guy. And before diving in to multidisciplinary research, I just want to say a big thank you for all of those that commented on international collaboration in the chat. I think there were at least 30 comments, and particularly around Horizon Europe and alternatives, etc. So thank you very much for that. In terms of multidisciplinary research, I think there's several points, and looking at it through the lens of the BBSRC strategic delivery plan, there are several points I'd like to perhaps draw your attention to. So firstly, in terms of the BBSRC strategic delivery plan, which is nested under the UKRI strategy, over the next kind of 2 to 3 years, we will have a big focus on strategic themes. So Melanie's already picked up on those in her slide set, particularly around building a green future, tackling infections, etc. And they will be a major part of our kind of collective UKRI portfolio, supporting multidisciplinary work across a range of strategic topics, global challenges, etc. And you'll see that really roll out, I would say, in the first, say, 6 to 9 months of next year in terms of calls for proposals, in terms of networks, in terms of collaborative opportunity. So really just to flag that in the first instance, but alongside the strategic themes, also that piece around transformative technologies, which often brings together, say, the life sciences with the engineering and physical sciences, but also the social sciences in terms of technology, diffusion and adoption, etc. And again, I think looking around areas of, say, artificial intelligence, around engineering, biology, etc., they also will present opportunity for multidisciplinary collaboration for those particular communities. More broadly than that, I do want to just perhaps draw your attention to one particular line in our kind of strategic delivery plan, which is around much more that bottom-up piece and around this concept of an interdisciplinary responsive mode operating across UKRI, and the vital role that that will play, particularly at that interface between councils. That's something that's currently under development, and we're seeking to make sure that we have that holistic coverage across the whole breadth of UKRI, and to make sure that nothing kind of slips through gaps. There has been kind of that kind of perception, etc. So that's definitely something to look out for too. So in terms of, I guess, that bottom-up piece through interdisciplinary responsive mode, what might be viewed slightly more top-down through the strategic themes and transformative tech. The only other piece I did want to flag as well, which is into core BBSRC responsive mode, is that we're rolling out, for example, the implementation of the review of data-intensive bioscience, and also the review of technology development that was published very recently. And they do have implications in terms of how we peer review proposals and the composition of committees, etc. So that's another way in which our, the overall system will be supporting kind of multidisciplinary approaches. Back to you, Guy.
Thank you, Amanda. And picking up on some things that have come up in the panel there, comments about, that people, whilst recognizing the importance of interdisciplinary addressing some of these big challenges, how might we go about and allowing kind of people the opportunity to have the space to kind of offer the strength that reviewers look at or panel members look at in terms of, they're convinced that it's good in all four of these areas or whatever. I mean, some people often say that interdisciplinary research struggles because it's seen as one weak bit or whatever.
And I think, and again, that's something that, we do pick up sometimes in our kind of stakeholder engagement. And I think it's something that, for example, in that interdisciplinary responsive mode that I mentioned, we'll be looking at the approach to assessment very carefully with those types of comments and feedback from the community in mind. And equally, I would say, going back to, for example, the approaches that we're rolling out, kind of prompted by the data-intensive bioscience review, prompted by the review of technology development, on a level they have broader applicability. So it is seeking to provide that kind of holistic kind of, I suppose, assessment of proposals, making sure we get that assessment that's sufficiently rigorous so we have assurance in taking our funding decisions, and holistic to be able to cover the breadth of the offer for a particular project. Also, as well, I think some of the flexibility that we have around the composition of the committees and being able to build the committees per round against a particular portfolio of applications, pulling in, drawing in from the pool of experts also helps. So okay. A few immediate reflections.
Okay, thank you very much. And now for Karen, I mean, I personally saw this big announcement about BBSRC's partnership with Innovator UK and got excited by that. So I think the community also would probably like to know about BBSRC's innovation agenda and particularly that announcement.
Yeah. Thank you, Guy. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Karen Lewis. I'm Executive Director of Capability and Innovation at BBSRC. And I think this is a really important question about that relationship with Innovate UK, particularly if we're going to deliver that ambition that Melanie mentions around really driving bioscience innovation. And as part of that, really supporting bioscience researchers to engage with business. We have had a successful and long history of a good relationship with Innovate UK. And in fact, I think since 2007, we've invested well over 130 million in joint programmes. And we've kept that dialogue to ensure we're strategically aligned, even when there have been financial constraints, which I know people on this call will be familiar when we weren't able to announce or deliver new programmes. So it's been, really fantastic as part of one of the outcomes of the positive settlement and allocations that we've been able to really revitalise that partnership with Innovate UK and encourage and support strategic collaborative programmes between bioscience and business. And importantly, that's reflected now as commitments within BBSRC Strategic Delivery Plan and equivalent within Innovate UK's. And overall, we've made a commitment to deliver over 55 million in co-developed joint programmes. And you might have seen, as Guy mentioned, there's already been some recent announcements around diet and health, and also further commitments to building capacity and capability in biofilms and the application of that science. Going forward, in the not too near future, where we will be announcing programmes in sustainable biomanufacturing. And again, that advantage of the strategic partnership with Innovate UK is allowing us to bring in other partners. So EPSRC will also be part of that programme, and also around sustainable production of alternative proteins. There are more plans being developed, and so I would say watch this space and encouraging you all to apply and connect across the ecosystem, as Melanie mentioned, because if we really are going to contribute to that ambition of government to grow the UK economy, to contribution to improving productivity and ultimately prosperity for us all, then that relationship with Innovate UK and BBSRC is really critical from our perspective to that.
Thank you, Karen, and that's a wonderful segue, and it wasn't planned, to a question that I think Melanie is best placed to answer, which is, what efforts will BBSRC be making in terms of, in their strategic plan, to improve research culture?
Right, so research culture has many different dimensions. It's about how we reward and recognise people, because that drives behaviours. Very sort of broadly, it's about ensuring that we are supporting research of the highest quality, so thinking about research integrity, research reproducibility, all of those types of things. It includes all of the aspects around equality, diversity, inclusion, so many different dimensions around research culture. A lot of these are systemic, so actually a lot of what we need to do is work in partnership across UKRI, but actually also with the system, to look at how we can shift how we are rewarding and recognising researchers. Obviously, assessment of grants is one aspect of that, but actually how people are reviewed when going through promotion in the system, which is obviously led by your organisations, is also another important part. So I think there is much that we will do across the piece, working with UKRI, working with the community, but also working internationally. So we've recently just signed the international agreement around reforming research assessment, which will actually look at a great many of these incentives and drivers, which then sort of have influence or do influence sort of that broader research environment and research culture. We will be looking at things that we can do specifically from a BBSRC perspective, understanding what particular issues there might be within our community, but I would actually say that a lot of these are system-based issues, which means that we have to work together sort of on them, and we are doing that. And in my role as people, culture and talent champion right across UKRI, these are some of the things that we're working on very actively at the moment. Thanks, Guy.
Thank you, Melanie. So the next question is for Sarah, and it's around institutes, which you saw in Melanie's talk were an important strategic aspect of BBSRC's portfolio. And Sarah, there's questions around the role of institutes in the strategic delivery.
Thank you, Guy. So in terms of the institutes, we consider them as national capabilities in strategically important areas. And so obviously their role is pivotal across all of the strategic themes within the delivery plan. And really, I wanted to draw our attention to beyond the research themes around ideas and impacts, but also their pivotal role in terms of place and innovation and their association where they sit alongside the research and innovation campuses, but also to draw on two specific examples, one picking up on Melanie's comments around research culture just now, around actually within our Institute assessment exercise for 2023, we introduced the team resume for researchers and innovators, and actually in terms of the size of the endeavour, actually one of a real step change for UKRI in terms of using this tool as part of an assessment mechanism. And thirdly, finally, I just wanted to pick up on the institutes in terms of our role as world-class organisations, and in particular their key role in terms of working with policymakers and engaging with the public around critical issues of the day, like food security, and as mentioned in the chat, for example, around the genetic technology precision breeding bill. So just wanted to flag that actually the role of the institute is pervasive across the whole of the strategic delivery plan. Back to you, Guy.
I think there's a follow-up. One of the questions in the questions and answers early was somebody observing about infrastructure investment, and they assumed, whether that assumption is correct or not, I don't know, but a lot of that perhaps was in institutes, and they asked the question of, how does somebody working at a UK or whatever university get access to a national capability infrastructure in the same way, my home institution is University of Southampton, where the RSV David Attenborough and Boaty McVoteface are housed, but people from right around the country can have access to those key pieces of infrastructure. So the national infrastructure within the institutes, what's being done in terms of that open access?
Thanks, Guy. And I think it's really important here to flag our institute strategy here around the three themes of capability, which we've touched on, culture, which we've touched on, and that connectivity piece. So in terms of our delivering against our institute strategy, we are looking at how we can ensure that the institutes are themselves as integrated as possible within the UK ecosystem.
Thank you very much. So the next question, Karen, one of the things which came up quite a lot in the comments about Horizon is lots of comments about kind of the ERC system, which includes sort of these more senior fellowships, and that's a big factor in terms of attracting and retaining really leading scientists in the UK. We had some questions beforehand about whether BBSRC had plans to reinstate more senior fellowship schemes like the David Phillips Fellows, which you might argue is a way of addressing any ERC shortfall.
Thank you, Guy. Well, in terms of the David Phillips Fellowship Programme, I'm sure as many people on this webinar will be aware, we paused the scheme following a review of our investment strategy for fellowships that looked at the establishment of the UKRI Future Leaders programme, and also the scale and impact of what we could do within BBSRC through the David Phillips Fellowships programme. And the outcome of that was that a recommendation to really focus on the discovery fellowships, which are and continue to be incredibly successful. So there are no plans for us to unpause the David Phillips Fellowship scheme. However, what I really want to highlight is something that Melanie mentioned, this commitment to that collective approach to people and talent going forward for UKRI, and the opportunities that presents now for us to look at the fellowship offering, and within that context of the broader thinking around Horizon Europe, about what we could offer in terms of fellowships, both in terms of simplifying and also the flexibility, so that we can offer support that will much more able meet the broad requirements of in our case, the bioscience research and innovation community, but also more broadly across UKRI.
Thank you, Karen. And I know there's lots of questions and answers in here, but please continue posting them. We may have a little bit of time, and that brings me to the next question. There's been a few questions live, and there was a few questions beforehand, and as somebody myself who's applied for a responsive mode and got excellent reviews and stuff like that, but not quite got the money, there's the question about resubmission, and you know, what's the policy in terms of, or is it evolving in terms of this resubmission aspect of grants? Melanie.
Yeah, thank you, Guy. We've all been there. So I remember, you know, being on the borderline, the grey zone as we used to have, and it is really challenging and difficult. And I think we recognise the questions that people have very genuinely around the allowance of submissions. We have a currently very defined policy. So we, if there is felt to be, when after the review in the panels, a very, very specific element that actually would really boost the grant, there might be a very specific question, then we will invite a resubmission. So we do have invited resubmissions, but of course there's many grants, as people have said in the chat, and those questions that sort of miss out. And we have looked at this in the past about when we did have an open resubmission policy, the success of those grants that were actually resubmitted. And actually we found, based on the data and the evidence, that actually they were not necessarily more successful than new grants that were submitted. It's been some time since we've looked at that, but that's one thing you do. What I would say, which I think is really significant, is that across UKRI, we've just launched an end-to-end review of peer review, which is partly to look at some of the research culture questions that I touched on, but also to look at new models for awarding grants. So people have mentioned, you know, lottery systems, golden tickets, sort of randomization when you're around sort of in a particular area, because it's often that panels can identify the really top, the outstanding grants, but then there's many that it's much harder if you had a different panel on a different day. So what we want to do as part of that is actually gather the evidence where I'll call them experiments have actually been conducted elsewhere. Lots of international funders have actually been doing some of these types of things. So we've got an evidence base, and then maybe pilot some of those things ourselves. So we're open to looking at this. We recognise this, but also recognise that if we open up resubmission for all of the grants, that's an awful lot more review requests that come out to people in the community. That's an awful lot more work for us internally. That's an awful lot more work for our panels. So we have to kind of tension all of those things together as well. So it's complicated, but we hear this and we're looking at it. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. And a question for Amanda. Obviously, there's this new spotlight mechanism that's been introduced in terms of responsive mode, and people are kind of interested as to what that really means.
Great. Thanks, Guy. And before saying a few words about spotlights and where we are now, I might just say a couple of words around where we were before we launched the spotlights. So I'm sure colleagues on the call will remember that BBSRC had a set of responsive mode priorities and then ran occasional highlights. And over time, we found that the responsive mode priorities, they almost actually became so broad and so many in nature that they provided almost like a kind of proxy description of remit without actually being a description of remit. And they also became, as we looked ahead to the development of the new strategic delivery plan published this year, they started to feel quite tired. In addition to that, I think with the highlight mechanism, which have been successful with some areas, we received feedback that actually having a kind of a highlight as a one-off for a particular round sometimes meant that whilst we caught some proposals, we didn't maximize the benefit from having the highlight in the first place, and having something that had perhaps a slightly longer life over several rounds would be more appropriate and more fitting if you're really looking to encourage proposals and boost your portfolio of research in a particular area. And so that's the background to essentially moving forward. Now we have the new strategic delivery plan published with what you could term a more agile, yet more focused and longer living kind of approach, the spotlight mechanism. So we will have a few spotlights. They will maybe say between 3 and 5 in a year. They will run over several rounds. They will be focused. They're not going to be cast incredibly broadly. And they're determined based on advice that we receive through our strategic advisory panels and other kind of external advice coming through to us, and aiming to drive forward particular parts of the strategic delivery plan, whether, for example, that's around an integrated understanding of health, thinking around the current spotlight around nutrition and diet, or equally in that more kind of ideas, kind of blue skies part of our portfolio, but also an eye on perhaps translation. And you can see that with the bioelectricity kind of highlight there as well. So hopefully that gives you a flavour of what to expect by way of the spotlight mechanism. The spotlight mechanism, I think also the final point I want to make is it allows us perhaps to genuinely respond in an agile way to, say, an emerging area as well, where we could add a spotlight in quite quickly. And so it does give us just more agility, more flexibility than the previous system. Thanks.
Thank you, Amanda. And I think in order to keep to time, that brings us to the end of the panel's question and answer session, and leaves me the opportunity to kind of raise a number of things with you, in which firstly, as I said, this webinar is being recorded. I note there's only 361 people still on the call, so I don't know what we said to lose 100 odd midway through, but you can tell all your colleagues it has been recorded so they can watch it whenever they like. And we'll be sharing the details about that shortly afterwards to the attendees, but there'll be other ways of getting to people. We will attempt to signpost links to the further information relating to the topics and questions which have raised today. And I'd like to just thank you all for the comments and engagement in these interactive sessions. And as I said, the Mentimeter will be left up for a few days if you want to participate in that. As I said, we've tried to cover the range of issues that you've come up, but we will certainly take a look at those and try to, as I say, cluster around themes. And if there is a real emerging area where we don't think we've actually kind of covered it as well as we could have done, we will certainly ensure we can try to do that to kind of come back to you in terms of that specific area. But I do think we've had a very broad coverage of issues today, and hopefully you'll appreciate the fact that actually it's a very rapidly moving and evolving landscape out there, and certainly people are working at full stretch to try to keep up with what's happening and ensure that BBSRC and indeed UK science can kind of continue to be as strong as it is. So it just leaves me now to thank the presenters, Melanie, Amanda and Aidan, for keeping to time, which is always handy because it's always very hard online to kind of stand up and kind of approach the lectern to try and get people to finish. So it's very good that everyone, no problems there. And to the panelists, Melanie, Amanda, Karen and Sarah, their technical support to kind of make this event happen. And finally, to the 313, it's dropped already during my closing remarks, people that are still online now, and thank you for spending Friday morning with us, and we look forward to continuing to work with you moving forward, because one thing's for sure, bioscience is exciting, there's loads for us to do, and it'd be really rewarding over the next few years working together. So thanks very much, and bye-bye.